29, 2025, at 2:48 a.m., a $15 million Russian air defense system over the city of Simferópol in occupied Crimea did the impossible. It self-destructed. The fire control computer, blinded by electronic warfare and terrified by a swarm of cheap Ukrainian drones, overloaded. The result was a H-4 missile cooked inside its own launch tube. A second later, a 200-kilogram one missile arrived at Mus to finish the job. The entire chain reaction had begun just 15 minutes earlier with 5 drones and a thick veil of fog. At 2:33 a.m., the trap was set by the sharp whistle of compressed air on a mobile catapult set up in a muddy field near Kherson, not on a runway. They had 5 Bobr drones, 4 of which were the hunter's decoys and the 5th was Alpha, the phantom Bobr. As they crossed the fog line, they used the thick, damp mist as an invisibility cloak and immediately dropped 40 feet. The Russians' first line of defense was not radar, but the ears of the 45 soldiers tensely in the trenches. We heard it before we saw anything. A faint, high-pitched buzzing sound that made it sound like angry wasps were approaching from all directions at once. Tracer rounds fired from the C-23A2 autocannon piercing the air at a rate of 2,000 rounds per minute streaked across the sky as 2 teams of Aglace missiles in the shadows. It was a magnificent display of firepower and completely useless. Here's the problem. Because of the thick fog, a soldier's effective line of sight was less than 100 feet. The drones flew at 40. Trying to hit them was like trying to hit a blindfolded hummingbird in a hurricane. Bob number 1, instead of trying to smuggle himself around the side of one of the drones, did something completely insane and announced his presence. He broke formation and dive-bombed a non-critical communications antenna, detonating the small warhead. The physical damage was 0, the tactical effect was immediate. The strike confirmed a real threat that the infantry could not handle and triggered the activation of the next defensive layer. Inside the Simferópol headquarters, the NEOM radar operator saw the small explosion on the thermal image, but the radar screen still showed 5 contacts. The 5th signal was a ghost signature emitted by the ghost beaver to maintain the electronic profile of the pack and maximize confusion. The operator was now hunting 4 real drones and 1 electronic fake. 4 fake Bobrs began their own scams later. The transponders began emitting a signal that mimicked the flight patterns of migratory birds. The algorithm tried to interpret the 4 birds in the fog of NEOM, and a permanent ghost flagged the real deceivers as low-priority biological ones. That hesitation was the only launch window Ukraine needed. 249 bomb. At 20,000 a Ukrainian HIMARS launcher fired a single ATCMS missile. The crew did not wait to keep watch because they had now become the most wanted men in Crimea. The launches created a massive thermal explosion that could be seen by Russian satellites and detected from miles away and could not be masked. The Russian counter-battery radar, probably a Supark 1M, had already detected its exact coordinates. The kill order was already in process. According to intelligence, the time to reach the positions of the Russian Iskander or Smerch missiles varied between 4 and 6 minutes. Their doctrine was not just shoot and run, it was a 90-second survival drill executed in time. As the MS attack rose into the air and rapidly advanced towards Crimea, Russian electronic warfare officers responded. The Krasuka 4 system suddenly went into action, launching a 300 kilometers interference balloon into the sky. The impact was instantaneous for the 4 fake drones. Starlink's connections were disrupted, controls were messed up. For 10 seconds they were nothing more than expensive gliders falling from the sky. This is the moment when 99% of drone strikes fail. To Russian electronic warfare officers, their screens showed that the signal from 4 drones had been lost. It was a perfect success, but they started celebrating too soon. This is where Ghost Boy's role as a discovery morphed into something like a project manager overseeing Apple-level AI flying far above Krasuka's effective range. Not only did he remotely control the drones, he activated a separate AI network with a high-bandwidth laser communication system between himself and 4 decoys. The ghost ball right above the enemy had just created its own vulnerable private Wi-Fi network. On Russian screens, the nightmare began. 4 drone signals went dead, confirming a successful signal disruption. However, the same 4 drones did not fall into the thermal feeds of the other systems. They were performing flawless maneuvers, executing attack runs. It was an impossible paradox how a disconnected enemy could continue fighting. This was a pre-programmed trigger for the Ghost Bobr. Flying out of the compression balloon instantly changed its function. It was no longer just a lookout, it became a remote-controlled pilot. Think of it as a flying combination of Tesla's autopilot and a Starlink satellite. 4 drones were revived. However, the Krasuka 4, currently operating at full power against an imaginary enemy, began emitting so much electronic noise that it affected its own lateral systems. The Paneer S2 operator was now in hell. The radar screen was a chaos filled with snow and static, coming from its own jamming equipment. The only reliable eyes were his thermal optics, and these showed the 4 very real and very fast threats hurtling through the fog. Or the first 57E missile, a hypersonic dart more valuable than a luxury car, locked onto Bobr number 2 and shot out of the raisins. The Phantom immediately sent an abort command, processing the launch in milliseconds. Delta avoidance maneuver. Bobr number 2 performed a 3G maneuver, abrupt enough to confuse the missile. The missile, unable to compensate for the sudden change in vector, exploded just behind him. Shrapnel tore the drone's tail apart, but it was still flying wounded. It was not dead. The first shot missed. The operator, probably cursing into his headset, now saw the 3 remaining false targets separating. He made a decision in seconds and opened up intense fire. He quickly launched 2 more missiles, one at Bobr number 3 and the other at Bobr number 1. 4. It was a textbook response. This was exactly what the Ukrainians wanted too. Bobr number 3 made no attempt to escape. Dutch flew into the missile. He evaporated with a silent flash on the heat shield. It was a calculated sacrifice, but the death served a purpose. The massive explosion and thermal flash instantly blinded the tank's optics and created a valuable half-second of cover for Bobr number F. Bob number 4. Using this chaos to descend even further, he caused it to lose lock on the second missile and crash uselessly into the edge of a slope. One drone went down and another was damaged but still engaged. The Russian operator now faced a nightmare scenario. The damaged Bobr number 2 was crawling towards him, while the damaged Bobr number 1 4 climbed from the bottom up and Bobr number 5 now began his own attack run. At that moment, the 2 surviving Bobrs initiated their final pre-programmed orders, a suicidal vertical climb. This final maneuver was the coup de grace, though not just for the drones. As the operator tried to track 3 separate targets performing irregular maneuvers, he pressed the controls all the way to the floor to tilt the radar to its maximum elevation. He pressed the firing button a 4th time. The fire control computer was already crippled by friendly interference and finally crashed when the processing limits of the swarm tactics were exceeded. It experienced a catastrophic overload. The 4th missile failed to launch. As it cooked, it exploded inside its own launch tube. The $15 million air defense system, a ball of fire and a heap of twisted metal, had disabled itself. The path was now open. The ATAS-SEMs, flying at 150 feet in the air, had used the terrain as a shield. It wasn't just flying, it was mapping the contours of the battlefield at Mach 3 speed, like a Porsche 911 racing off-road. As it crossed the crest, the now flaming air defense headquarters and the massive fuel depot just behind it were completely exposed. The 100 kilograms payload was about to be delivered. The ATAC entered a terminal dive. Its trajectory was now almost vertical. On the ground, the So-23-2 anti-aircraft artillery crew tried in vain to turn and elevate their weapons systems. They had less than a second to impact. This was a pointless gesture against a target moving at Mach 3. Its effect was not a generalized explosion, this was a concentrated injection of catastrophic energy. The molded 100 kilograms warhead worked exactly as designed, utilizing the Monroe effect. All the explosive power was concentrated into a hypersonic jet of molten copper traveling at over 6 miles per hour. This jet struck the reinforced roof of the NEVO-M command center and did not perceive it as an obstacle, despite the fact that in milliseconds it had punched through 3 feet of military-grade steel and concrete. The sequence of explosions in the bunker was instantaneous and created 2 distinct death mechanisms. First, the disaster is a catastrophic overpressure event. The explosion created a pressure wave that reached 100 cc at the center of the explosion and diminished to 500 cc within a radius of about 10 feet, which was strong enough to shatter steel. The radar console communication chains and the 200 officers inside were not simply blown away, they were subjected to a force that turned solid bodies to dust. Second, secondary penetration. The copper jet, still carrying enormous kinetic energy, burst from the bunker floor and slammed directly into the nearest 70-ton diesel tank of the Bardiska fuel depot. A chain reaction ensued in the warehouse. In 5 seconds, 840 tons of diesel fuel reached a critical level, releasing a single, continuous fireball that shot 80 feet into the air. The resulting shockwave was registered by regional seismographs as a magnitude 1.8 earthquake at 2:51 a.m. and in a moment of perfect cosmic irony, as the Symphony headquarters 30 kilometers away evaporated, a Russian Iskander missile guided by Supark 1M radar struck an empty mud field. Not only did the HARS crew survive, but their enemy's counterattack struck a target that no longer existed. Above is the real-time combat damage assessment log of the Phantom Bobr's undetected mission. Its thermal camera recorded the complete thermal destruction of the primary target structure, followed by consecutive violent explosions of the fuel tanks. As ammunition depots stationed very close to the warehouse began to explode, secondary explosions followed in the compound. The Russian infantry left on the ground were no longer a fighting force, they were targets of opportunity in a kill zone from which they could not escape. The Ghost Bobbr's feed recorded numerous thermal signatures scattered from the inferno. It was confirmed that Russia's Crimean Air Defense Control Center was systematically destroyed in its entirety, with each explosion dealing a painful blow to Russia. Let's break down the results in terms that the Kremlin's accountants can understand. In a matter of seconds, $35 million worth of high-end Russian naval hardware evaporated. The Nevo M radar, the Pamir S-2, the command and control center for all of Crimea. It was all gone. It was wiped off the map. This isn't just the loss of equipment, it's also the loss of the trained and experienced crews who operated it. In that headquarters, we're talking about an estimated 200 civil servants and technicians who are no longer receiving salaries, and then there's the fuel. 840 tons of diesel fuel, the lifeblood of any mechanized army, was lost. From a purely financial standpoint, this was a catastrophic loss. Militarily, it was much worse. That fuel wasn't just there for the parade. It was the operational reserve for 4 Russian brigades, meaning there are currently 5,000 troops effectively trapped on the front lines. T-90 tanks, armored personnel carriers, supply trucks, they were all about to become immobile metal boxes with zero fuel autonomy and very expensive. Ukraine had cut a 160-kilometer supply line without firing a single shell. Think of it in business terms. Ukraine had not only disrupted its enemy's supply chain, it had also captured their mobility capabilities in a hostile manner and forced them into a total operational shutdown for at least 30 days. But what could be more embarrassing than having your failures exposed? The boa constrictor didn't die. It published high-resolution evidence of Ukraine's direct intervention that was then quickly leaked to every telegram channel from Kyiv to Vladivostok. Although Putin's spokesman later described it as a small fire caused by a technical glitch, the world saw 4K thermal imaging. They saw the secondary explosions, they saw the tank on fire. The narrative was Russia's impenetrable shield, but its high-tech wonder weapons were effectively neutralized by a few essentially modified hobby drones. For Russia, the choice presents a cruel and impossible one. The hit-and-run tactic demonstrates that hunting HIMARS launchers in real time is a losing game. The only logical reactions would be to spread out their high-value assets. They face a strategic impasse. If they continue to keep them close together for the purpose of protecting their high-value assets, they create one massive, juicy target, as we saw tonight. But if they spread it all out, they create a dozen smaller, weaker targets that air defenses will be unable to cover simultaneously. There is no right answer, but the real and lasting damage goes beyond the tactical dilemmas, the paranoia that this attack injected throughout the Russian military. From now on, every Russian radar operator who sees a flock of birds on their screens on a still night will have a seed of doubt inside them. Are they really birds? This paranoia is driving them into an unwinnable, asymmetric arms race. Russia will now have to spend billions of dollars on new radar software, faster processors, and improved interceptors to counter a threat that cost $10,000. And Ukraine's response is that they'll just release a new open-source firmware update for their drone fleets. It's an economic death spiral, a 5 kilobytes update for millions of lire. So let's do the math. A $10,000 drone-led operation overran a $35 million defense network, crippled a 5,000-man combat force, and created a strategic crisis for the entire southern front. Even the best hedge fund on Wall Street can't offer you this kind of return on investment. The lesson is simple. In the 21st century, the deadliest threat isn't always the one with the biggest bang. It's the one who outsmarts you, who turns your strengths into deadly weaknesses. All it took was a bit of fog, some clever coding, and a deep understanding that the Russian war machine is a clumsy and predictable behemoth. Maybe next time Russia should bring in a firefighter and a better IT department. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us. We look forward to your support.